thank you very much for agreeing to meet with us and for the privilege of getting from you firsthand a little bit of an overview of your family history, where they come from, how they arrived in Canada, how you arrived in Canada, and your families and your involvement in Polonia. The name Wilk is very well known, not only in Edmonton but in Alberta. You have been personally, and your parents have been very much involved in Polonia. And we would like to capture, as the Canadian Polish Historical Society, from your perspective, in your own words, your family history, your personal history, and your proud Polish heritage, because I know you've always been a very proud Pole and then very active. So thank you for doing this, Stan.
My pleasure.
So if you don't mind, this is a casual conversation, everything's in your own words, but maybe let's sort of start at the beginning. If you could tell us, and I know you speak Polish really well, so feel free to go back and forth, but maybe tell us about your parents, where they come from, how they met, and just walk us through.
So my father was in the Polish Army, and during the war he didn't like talking about that, but once he shared with me that they were fighting somewhere on the Russian front, and when the battle was finished, there was a train, and they thought, the soldiers thought that they were going back to Poland, and the train stopped in Germany, and he got thrown into a prisoner of war camp, and he remained there until the Americans at the end of the war liberated the prisoner of war camps.
Stan, so Wilk obviously was his last name. What was his first name?
Stanisław.
Stanisław. So you inherited the name as well.
Oczywiście.
Oczywiście.
And so he said that he slept on cement or concrete, and they had potatoes to eat, so the diet was meager. My mother, on the other hand, worked on a farm in Germany, so she went from Poland to Germany, and she was there during the war. She had an accident. I don't recall how that happened, but her right index finger was cut off. And so after the war, my parents met in Germany, and I was born, and we lived in a city called Essen, which is the west, or was the west at that time. And I still have some memory of living there. And my parents wanted to establish a better life for me and for themselves, obviously. So decision was made to immigrate to Canada. At that time, there was a shortage of farm labor in the West, and so my father signed a contract, and he came here to the Willingdon area. Mm-hmm. I don't recall the farmer's name.
So what year would that have been? When did you leave Germany?
1951.
And how old were you when you left Germany?
Well, I wasn't here yet.
Okay.
So my father came by himself. I remember he was on one of these army trucks, and I was crying, and obviously seeing my father leaving. Uh-huh. And so in 1952, I immigrated here with my mother. Mm-hmm. To the Willingdon area, and on the farm. So the farmer wanted to set up accommodation for the three of us. So they painted, whitewashed a chicken coop, if you will, as I recall it, and so that's where we were. But it was not in agreement with my mother. She didn't like the atmosphere. So after the contract was finished, we came to Edmonton.
So, Stan, don't mind me if I stop you here.
Of course.
So, how did you and your mom come from Essen? Essen was already a large city, very urban setting. Did you come? Obviously, you came by ship, I imagine, right?
Yeah.
Do you recall the name of the ship?
Yeah, Scalbrin.
Okay.
And
So, and where did you depart?
I can't tell you that. I don't.
Do you
know.
remember the voyage? How old were you at that time?
Well, I was born in 1947. We came in 1952, so I would have been 5.
So you may have some recollection of that voyage.
Yes, I remember going across the sea. It was, with all the waves and what have you. I remember vomiting.
But that's a big adventure for a 5-year-old, I imagine, right?
That's right. I vaguely remember being on a train from eastern Canada to the west.
Probably Halifax you arrived at, Pier 21?
As a matter of fact, it was Halifax. Thank you. I recall there was a commissioner in Halifax, and over the years I lost his photograph. Very nice fellow, and he left a box of chocolates for my mother and I in our room that we had.
Mm-hmm.
And I still remember that. We came out west. The farmer picked us up, and it was one of these 2-ton trucks, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Took us to Wellington, and then when we departed, the farmer brought us to the immigration building that's still standing today downtown Edmonton, and that was it. He said all the best, and left. And there were virtually no services then that we see today.
For immigrants.
Correct. So somehow there was a family by the last name of Vontek,
Mm-hmm.
and they took us in, and it was a house on 97th Street and 109th Avenue, I believe. And basically it was just a small shack,
Mm-hmm.
for lack of a better adjective. And so his family and we squeezed into this small house, and it was directly across the street where Charlie Kozak ended up having accent printing.
Yes, okay.
So so it's a new building or a newer building there now, and so I can't say how long we were there. If I would say about a week or so.
And you were then about, what, 7, 8 years old?
Oh no, 5.
Still 5 years old, okay.
Yeah. And so they found us an apartment down the street on 97th Street.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother, they found a job for my dad. My mother was washing dishes on 97th Street and 107th A Avenue.
Hmm.
And it's actually interesting because at that time, there were some Polish businesses along there. And so where the Ukrainian Credit Union used to be,
That's right.
in that building, it was a Polish restaurant.
Oh, really?
And believe it or not, I still remember the fellow's name, and his last name was Szupka.
Szupka.
Yeah. And so then they had Stanley, the cleaner, dry cleaner down the street. I think there was a delicatessen there. And that's those were our beginnings.
And as a child, did you converse with your parents in Polish? Was that the language at home? Because you obviously maintained your Polish language till today.
Yes, and so it's rather interesting that I couldn't speak English, and I woke up the next day and I could speak English. It was sort of an overnight quickly.
That's right.
That's right. And so then we moved on to another rooming house in the Macaulay area, and there were a couple of Italian fellows that were living there, and so they used to cook spaghetti, which I enjoyed, and they used to teach me Italian.
Oh.
So I can say a few words in several languages, greeting people, and it breaks the ice.
Sure does.
Today. So I say to people, be proud of where you come from, who you are, and the more languages that you know, it'll come in handy somewhere down the road.
Certainly.
And it certainly has for me. So.
So you lived in that rooming house, and you would have started school shortly thereafter, right? You were becoming of age to go to school.
That's correct. So I started at Sacred Heart School from grade 1 to grade 3, and then during grade 3 I went to St. Basil's. But there was no Polish program at that time.
But that's interesting because later on Sacred Heart School had a Saturday Polish program in there, and now St. Basil has a full-time Polish program. So you were sort of the pioneer of those schools. They became Polish after. Yeah.
So my parents they were quite involved in the Polish community right from the beginning, and so I remember going to dances with my parents at the old Polish Hall, which would have been on 98th or 99th Street and 107A Avenue. It's a Buddhist monastery.
That's right.
And at that time, 5-year-old, 6-year-old kid, Echoes were playing, very popular musical group. And I was not afraid to dance with the bride at weddings that we went to. Byłem odważnym. And what else can I share? Oh, and so we attended Holy Rosary Church, but it was the old Holy Rosary Church. That's on right. 95A Street. And so my first communion was, and I still have the photograph today, and we were in front of the administration, plebania, by the church. And so the Polish community outgrew that church. And by the way, that's where the first house my parents bought was on 95A Street. There were a lot of Polish people in the area because it was close to
the church.
The church, of course. And so when the land was bought to build the new church, Holy Rosary, where it stands today across the street from Nate, the old church was sold to the Ukrainian community. Okay. And so a couple of fellows I went to school with, their last name was Tarnowski. And their father was a Ukrainian priest, and he was the priest of that church. Well, somewhere along the way, the church caught on fire and it burned down. And so if you go to that area, you'll see that now where the church was, it's a parking lot. And the new church was built, brick facade across the street where it stands today. So in those days, I was an altar boy, ministrantem, and there wasn't enough money to finish building the church, so our masses were held in the basement, where now the hall is and library, what have you. And then when there was enough money, they finished building the church. So I have fond memories when I was a young boy. And I took part in a lot of community groups. All Polish boys, or many Polish boys, played the accordion. So I played the accordion. Mr. Kirichuk was my teacher, so I took accordion lessons for 3 years. My son has the accordion today. Excuse me. and so we still have that in the family. I belong to Polish Scouts.
Tell me more about it, because that was a movement that was really, really big and has quite a lengthy tradition here in Alberta, Polish Scouts. How does that start?
Yeah, you know, I remember the one year we were building two-man kayaks made out of plywood, and Druh Gruszczynski, he lived in the Killarney area, so we would go there on weekends, and we were building these two-man kayaks. And I remember being at Crimson Lake. That was before the land was bought
Garner.
At Garner Lake now. And so we were at Crimson Lake for a couple of weeks during summer holidays. And so that was quite the adventure. And
did they float?
They did. And, Mr. Gruszczynski was a very good teacher, and we obviously were not bad students.
So where did Scouts meet? Because you would have zbiórki, right? Once a week at least.
Yeah, and that part, you know, I don't recall.
Did you go to camps? Did you have obozy, bivaki?
The only camp that I remember was Crimson Lake.
Crimson Lake.
Yeah, and. So, you know, I brag occasionally when I want to make a point that when the Polish Hall was built, grałem, śpiewałem I tańczyłem na tej scenie. Because I played the accordion.
Yeah.
I belonged to a dance group, and so we were practicing on the stage at the Polish Hall and all of that. So I always participated in the Polish community. My father was a volunteer because when the Polish Hall was built, it was roughly around the same time as the church. I can't remember which came first. It may
I
be the
think
church.
it was completed, right? Polish Hall was completed in 54, wasn't it?
No, 1960.
60, okay.
Correct. And so my father was a volunteer pouring cement because he had a job with the city as a cement finisher. So there were a lot of volunteers there. My dad was one of them. And I have very, very fond memories of being at the Polish Hall. We attended dances on Saturday nights. I was a volunteer because there was Tuesday night bingo at the Polish Hall. So my dad used to come there to work, and all volunteer effort, of course. The old Edmonton Gardens, there was a car bingo that the Polish community put on. And, you know, I was there with my dad, many others. So very fond memories of those days. If only those walls could talk.
Be careful what you ask for.
Well, this is it. We had a lot of fun memories. Now, 3 Maja, you know, 3rd of May, very important date for Poland. And when we had celebrations at the Polish Hall, 3 Maja celebrations, if you didn't come there early, you had to stand at the back of the hall. The building was packed.
That's right.
Today, working there, it's a different picture. And so I come from the old school, and for me, it's kind of difficult to understand. But it is what it is. So we had a very small community in Edmonton, a very active community in Edmonton, and very close. And so a lot of the families that you'd be knowledgeable of or with, Thomas, you know, their parents, you know, and I've known. It's a different picture today than it was then.
Sure.
So you know, that's how things started.
Polish community was very much, it was a tight community, there was a lot of volunteering, and we almost created, well, that generation almost created sort of a little Poland over here, right? That was the only way to interact with Polish language, Polish food, Polish music.
But the culture, all of that, yes.
That's right.
Of course.
Stan, throughout all those days, did your parents or you ever go to Poland to visit relatives?
Well, I go every year for several years now, other than this past year because of the pandemic. But my parents have not. Now, my dad, well, my mother actually went once with my cousin. And I should say, just back up a little bit, I have no brothers and sisters. So my mother and parents were thinking ahead. So they sponsored my cousin, who was like my sister, living in Edmonton, and she has 3 daughters, Helena Stupar. And so my mother went there once, and my father went once, and I went with him. And he wanted me to go with him because he wanted to show me where he came from.
For sure.
And so he came from a small city at that time of 60,000, Tomaszów Mazowiecki.
Tomaszów Mazowiecki.
Yeah, and so...
So what year was that, do you know, roughly, when you went?
1985, I believe.
85,
yeah.
Okay.
And
so still before the changeover from communism to free Poland.
I had a shock treatment because when we landed at the airport in Warsaw, looking out the window of the airplane, it was taxing, and you saw these Polish soldiers with machine guns, and I thought, oh my gosh, what's this all about? And then for me it was a bit of a shock because even though I could speak Polish, and I was a proud, pardon my slang, Polak, I had a shock treatment because, yes, I knew we were going to Poland. The people are Polish. They're going to be speaking Polish. But it came as a shock because all the advertisements and signs were in Polish, and the radio, you turned it on, it was in Polish.
That's right.
People were speaking Polish. And it was just that culture shock.
It's actually a real language that people actually speak.
That's
not just my family and my friends, right?
That's correct. So I found that interesting, and I met a fellow that worked for me for a short while, and this is worthwhile mentioning because that's, I've got family there, and so I'll get into that in a minute. But this fellow was very interesting, and his name is Janek Fomin. Lives in Warszawa, and his father was an architect, and his father helped in the reconstruction of Warszawa after the war, and as a thank you from the government, the city of Warsaw, Finland built, I think in that area, about 100 or more houses, drewniane domy, and they're named Fińskie domy.
Fińskie domy.
So when I met Fomin here, so when I went with my dad, I escaped for a week, if I can say that, because my cousin also lived in Warsaw. So I spent a week with the Fomins. And where I'm going with this is that there were very interesting people. So Janek got the house after his father, and where is the house? It's close to Łazienki, and where the French embassy right now, they're probably 50 meters, 75 meters, if you look straight down. So Polish people know where, a lot of Polish people would know where Ulica Piękna is, but they were on Jazdowa, which is a couple of blocks over. And I think it's called John Lennon now because it was renamed, so it's got 2 names. So you can see the Canadian embassy actually, and I would say probably 125, 150 meters. The German embassy is close by, American embassy. So they're right where the embassies are, you see. And so they have a house, and their yard, an average yard in the city of Edmonton, their backyard was probably 3 times the size.
Mm-hmm.
A park right beside, and they still live there. But my better half's friend from high school, or not from high school, but from school, her daughter was a well-known, particularly in Warsaw, in the media. She worked for a TV station. And so what happened was the city of Warsaw wanted to terminate the residency of the Fomins. So a new mayor came in, Burmistrz, I think is the word, and I think the Finnish ambassador, and I believe, and then this gal got involved, and so now what they're going to do, the remaining houses are going to be renovated for posterity's sake, so people see what Finland did for Poland.
Warsaw.
For Poland, yeah. So I digress. I met some very interesting people. On my family side, my mother's side, I had a cousin in Nova Huta. She's passed away. I had cousins in Kłodzko. On my father's side, Tomasz Mazowiecki, a couple of cousins passed away. Obviously, uncle and aunt passed away. In Łódź, I have a cousin who's she just retired. She's a professor. They have a medical school in Łódź. So she was one of the professors there, and her husband is a physicist, Bogdan. And so he retired recently. We're all getting older. So, I go to Poland every year. We have a place to stay in Warszawa, close to Stare Miasto. And, but we didn't go last year because of COVID.
So if you don't mind, I'll take you back a little to your youth. So you were raised in the Polish spirit, within the Polish community. Your parents participated in the Polish community. And now let's take you to your late teens, your education, and then ultimately you ended up starting a business. Can you tell us a little bit more about your past the formative years? Yeah,
so I went to NAIT. I took business administration there back in the 60s, and I also took the printing when I was younger, and one thing led to another, and I had a little printing shop that I was doing part-time while I was working full-time elsewhere. Actually, I managed in my 20s I was there for 3 or 4 years at Northwestern Utilities. So I ran the printing department. And so I had this little print shop, and because the community was small, everybody knew me, and so I used to receive printing from various organizations and businesses. I sold that, and the pressure was a little too much, working full time, having a family.
But if I may interject, your printing business was well known. I recall you actually printed my first business cards in your shop. Polish community relied on your print shop. You were printing tickets, invitations, and things of that nature, weren't you?
Yeah. Well, and how this started, actually, Thomas, when I met you, that was later on, and. I started a company in December of 1979. You can imagine, I remember that. And it was to print break-open tickets.
Okay.
So a break-open ticket is like a one-armed bandit, if you will. You pull a tab and you have 3 cherries or 3 bars or what have you. I was one of the people that introduced break-open tickets to the province of Alberta, selling it to legions and bingo halls and what have you. You know, I go quite far or back quite far with that. So the purpose was to manufacture these tickets, and I won't get into, it'll take too long, the details of that. So it was the right product at the wrong time for me because of my personal life, you see.
Yes.
And so we managed to get the first shipment of tickets together, and I sold that, but you know, we had some difficulties at that time. I took on a partner, so I had 72% of the company, and the other gentleman had the rest. And so we had to switch over to regular printing, to job printing, and so we printed brochures and letterheads and business cards, and that's when I met you. And I have to thank you, by the way, for your support at that time. Not only was that nice to have from you, but it was needed. And so thank you so much for your support, Thomas. So that's how things started. The technology was changing, and so finally I got involved with politics, and my interest went in a different direction.
And that's important because you run for office. As a matter of fact, there really are 3 of us in Edmonton and in Alberta that ever run for provincial government, but you were the first one, weren't you? You ran before Mr. Schwender, or after?
After.
After, okay. Tell us about it. Because how did you get involved in politics?
Well, through Walter. I remember getting a call back in, it would be 1981, I believe, and Walter Schwender decided to run for the nomination of Edmonton Belmont against a fellow by the name of Bill Mack. And I received a call. I had my printing company at that time, and I received a call from Andrzej Kubicki, Andy Kubicki, and he said, Walter Schwender is running. I'm helping him, and I'm calling you to see if you would like to get involved. And my answer was immediate. I said, tell Walter I'd be delighted to.
Perfect.
And so I did some printing for him gratis because, you know, that's
part of the political donation. Yeah.
Well,
and support.
Sure. He was a friend of mine.
Sure.
We grew up together, and so that's how the whole thing started. And Walter, along the way, we used to go to different events together, and that was before he met you, I believe. And so that sort of piqued my interest, and I was involved in the leadership, and so that would have been in 1986. Correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas.
That was the one that Don Getty became the premier?
That's correct.
Yes. So you would have been supporting Julian Koziak?
I supported Julian Koziak, and I'm rather proud of that. Why? Because I was running for the nomination of Edmonton Norwood, and then Catherine Chichak decided to run, and she beat me by 10 votes. So eventually I said thank you very much, because she won the nomination but lost the election, you see, and it was lost to the NDP. So so what happened was, I hope it doesn't come across the wrong way, but I was instrumental in Julian Koziak winning all delegates in Edmonton Norwood, because they lost a handful prior to that. And so then I met John Shumlas, of course, and Bill Darchuk I knew from my Lions Club. And so that's how it all started. And so we had a lot of fun. It was a learning experience. I wouldn't trade it for the world. it was a very interesting experience, a political experience.
But that experience later converted. You were appointed to some prominent positions, correct, in post-secondary education.
Yes. So what happened was in the mid '80s, I was not elected, but I received an appointment from or by Dick Johnson, who was the Minister of Advanced Education. Then he became Treasurer, and so less than a year later, when my predecessor retired, I was appointed as chair of the Private Vocational Schools Advisory Council. So I and my committee answered directly to the minister.
The minister's office.
Right. And then I was reappointed for a second term of 3 years by David Russell, who was the Minister of Advanced Education and also Deputy Premier. So I was there for the entire 6 years. And so that was very interesting because it showed me, how government works. And we traveled around the province visiting some of the private vocational schools. So, in life, all of this is a good education, learning experiences. And I just want people to know that this wasn't a paid position.
No, this was giving back.
Yeah, so I received an honorarium, and I was paid expenses, whatever they may have been, sure. But it was not a paid position.
And then you continued your involvement with our Polish community. Ultimately, you are now holding a very important position for the last 16 years, is it, right? That very Polish hall that your father was helping out pour concrete into, you're managing the whole place right now, and it's no longer a Polish hall. It's really a convention center, isn't it?
Right, and so that's an excellent question, and I never expected in my involvement in with the Polish community that someday I'd be working there at the Polish Hall. And again, life circumstances brought me to that facility, and it was a door opener simply because of the people that I knew. Mm-hmm. But if I wouldn't had some abilities, I wouldn't have lasted, much to my surprise, 16 years. 16 years. So at the beginning, it was important for me to learn about what was happening there before I started making some decisions. And as time went on, the board of directors gave me more and more ability to do things on my own. So I have fond memories of the 16 years that I was there. One of my goals was to improve, to set up a good business model mm-hmm. that they didn't have before. And so it works. And today, it's a totally different scenario. Not only that, the building was built to have one function. Because in those days, you invited the whole community.
That's right.
So today, Thomas is inviting me to his function, and tomorrow or the day after, I'm inviting Thomas to mine. And in that building, you could have 500-600 guests. And that's why the kitchen is in the basement area, because at that time, the food was served downstairs. All the talking was done downstairs. After everything was finished, everyone went upstairs for entertainment and dancing.
Sorry to interrupt, but at one point in time, this was the largest venue in Edmonton. There were some prominent rock and roll type of performances taking place at the Polish Hall, right?
We've had all kinds of events there historically. Tuesday night bingos for quite a few years. We had wrestling and boxing matches there. We had rave parties there. I think there were 2 or 3 when I began, and it was time to move on. The city was putting pressure on us. They didn't want these type of functions. Plus, some people were saying in the community, the Polish community, about the image that these kind of events would have. So we stopped that, and so now it's a banquet facility, and I renamed it, and the board agreed with me. So it's now known as Polish Hall Banquet and Conference Center,
which it is,
and that's what it is. So,
and you saw a massive renovation of the building. This is not the building that your father built. This
correct. The building was dated, and so a large wedding in those days of 400 or 500 people. What do you consider a large wedding today? If I can answer my own question, if I said 125, 150, that's probably on the mark, considered a large wedding. So who would want to have a wedding for 150 people in a room that holds 500?
Mm-hmm.
You see? So I recommended to the board, and they listened, and that we divide the building into 3 banquet rooms.
Mm-hmm.
So we have 3 different sizes of banquet rooms. And so we started with the basement area simply because we weren't getting a lot of functions there, and I saw business slipping through our fingers. People that would come by to view, and most would say thank you very much and move on somewhere else. The odd one would be honest with us and say, look, this is what it is. So the basement renovation, and that would have been about 9 years ago, roughly. Right. And so we received a grant from the province, a sizable grant. Mm-hmm. And and the people involved with that, and you were instrumental, and I publicly want to thank you for that. Quite often we don't say thank you often enough. And so we received the grant for the renovations.
Z mojej strony, będąc w rządzie, jak była ta aplikacja o grant, twój pomysł był bardzo ważny, bo gdyby to był tylko dom dla Polonii, to by było o wiele trudniej zdobyć pieniądze, ale ty zamieniłeś ten polski dom na convention center i on teraz służy całemu społeczeństwu, prawda? A więc to pomogło też w finansowaniu tego.
So after the renovations, all of a sudden the accolades started coming. People were surprised at what was accomplished, and that Stanisław Wilk wasn't blowing hot air. And so that was the beginning. So 9 years later, doing the upstairs renovation, it came very easily because the board saw past performance of what was happening. Mm-hmm. So I had a window of opportunity, and the Canadian government, the Western Diversification Fund, had a grant, and there was a short time frame of applying for it, and so I applied for this grant, $500,000. Without that, we would never be able to do the renovation upstairs. I also secured a grant for $125,000 from the provincial government. So here we have $625,000 in the bank. And that's how we were able to finance the renovations that cost almost $1.5 million upstairs. Mm-hmm. We have an elevator now, a food elevator from the kitchen to the main floor. So it's been a journey, and so what was important for me is that the 3 owners of the Polish Hall, the 3 nonprofit societies, mm-hmm. One is Towarzystwo Polsko-Kanadyjskie, Towarzystwo Polskich Kombatantów, Towarzystwo Polskich Weteranów. And so my goal is to develop a good business model and to bring business in. And we're still serving the Polish community, because I'll get into that in a couple of minutes. But the money that comes in, that these organizations attain, with issues surrounding gaming, casinos, and there's been negative talk about this for a number of years. You would have been involved with that as well. That someday the funding will stop. So that's another conversation. But so my side is to produce the income, and what these three organizations do with that money, it's up to them.
But
do some good for Polonia.
You put together a sustainable model where the Polish Hall can carry its own weight financially, right?
That's correct. That's correct. And so that's where it is. What do we do for? What does the Polish Hall do for Polonia? Because there are people that say we don't do anything. There are people that say we don't do enough, but we do quite a bit, because there are constant meetings that people don't get charged for meeting space. We have the Polish Cultural Society, and I said to the people involved, ja chcę, żeby wy się czuły jak w swoim domu. They ended up buying a piano, which we store for them. And there are quite a few, and I'm sure you've been attendant there. And they have their jazz and concerts there. They bring in entertainers from Poland as well. We charge them something because we want them to feel that they're making a contribution.
Sure.
But also it costs a lot of money to maintain the building. So I've given them a substantial discount, and so that we do for the Polish community. We have two different dance groups that come to practice there, and various, and Pani Faszko, with the historical society has attended various meetings, and on it goes. So yes, we do more. Can we do more? Well, you can always do more,
but you have to operate a business at the same time.
Thank you.
Right, because otherwise, if you can't pay the bills, there won't be a Polish Hall.
Thank you. That's exactly it.
So, Stan, that is quite impressive. For a little boy born in just liberated, Polish boy born in just liberated Germany, you end up in the middle of nowhere on a farm, and then you grow up in a Polish community, and now you're managing, which is the biggest asset of our Polish community, not only in Edmonton but in all of Alberta. This is sort of the jewel in the crown of the Polish community's infrastructure. What are your thoughts about, you actually highlighted some differences, how Polish community volunteered more, people showed up in larger numbers at events. You mentioned 3 Maja, Dzień Konstytucji, how if you didn't show up early, you would be in the back of the hall. That dynamics has changed, perhaps because of the fact that Poland is a free country. Everybody can go back. Everybody can watch Polish television, listen to Polish radio, internet, and there is no influx of Polish people. The last real wave we had was that solidarity wave in the 80s. You have that perspective. What do you foresee? How do you see our Polish community morphing over time? And what it is that we should be cognizant of moving forward from your experience?
Well, what I see are various, and I went to a Polish school as well. I forgot to mention that.
Sobotna szkoła?
Sobotna szkoła. And so because of the job that I have, the position that I have, my Polish has improved, actually, because you use it or lose it.
That's right.
And so I see things happening, the dynamic. People are involved with the Polish schools, because we have more than one. The dance groups, the cultural side. What What on the negative side, what bothers me is that we have such a large Polish community here, and let's talk about Edmonton. And we've had entertainers coming in from Poland, and hardly anyone would attend these things. And so there hasn't been that support, and so it's hard for me to wrap my head around that. I think we're going to continue being a community. We're a proud nation, a Polish nation. I don't know who is going to replace me. I would like to, because of my age, I'm closer to the door than not, and so I'll be there for a little while longer. But I'd love nothing better than to find my replacement, have a hand in that, because to spend all these years building what was built. And don't get me wrong, I've said a number of times, but I couldn't accomplish these things without others.
Sure.
And that's how it works. You could never be elected if people didn't
by all means.
support you.
By all means, it's all a team sport. Stan, do you think that our Polish community in Alberta, in Canada, in a way is a victim of our own success? We integrated really well into the Canadian society. We hold professional standings as artists, politicians, academics, and others. Poland is a free country, so that need that your mom and dad had, and you as a young person of sort of clinching onto anything Polish here, no longer really exists. If you're missing Poland, you go to Poland every year right now. You have a place you can stay at in Warszawa. So perhaps, and there is no influx, and maybe thankfully there is no influx, because Poles can do well in Poland. They don't need to leave their families and towns behind to look for a better life. So that could be part and parcel of the fact that the attendance isn't as great. Our schools are starting to struggle surviving, as you know.
Yes.
Our Harcerstwo is smaller. Our dancing groups are smaller because the third, fourth, fifth generation is so well integrated. We're all proud of being Polish,
Correct.
but we don't have to participate in those things anymore as much.
And you're absolutely right. I agree with your comments. So I don't know where this is going to evolve beyond us. I like to think that we will continue doing what we do, perhaps not as aggressively or as openly as we do now. The Polish Hall, which is and was the center of Polonia, and it'll be interesting to see how that building evolves.
Well, you put, when you got there, it was 80 years old, and or close to it, and now after your renovations and restorations, this building has another 80 years worth of life. So I'm sure, and it's in such a prominent place, I'm sure you gave it a license, especially because of your business model. We don't have to worry about casinos or no casinos, donations. The fact is that this building can sustain itself by doing what it's doing, and that's probably, you had many contributions to our Polish community, but that is one that you could be very proud of, because relying on a charitable model, there was always a question what's going to happen tomorrow. Now, as long as they follow your plan, the building will be fine.
And I am proud of the accomplishment, because it's been a journey for 16 years, and it's the building the facility is successful. And if you look at our client list, we have an excellent client list because of who we are and what we do.
Sure.
So we have an excellent reputation. and I think I should make a comment about this because the Sirena Club is closed.
For people who may not know what Sirena was, this was sort of the Polish disco. It started as Kopernik, I think. I remember
Correct.
as a young fella, if I wanted to meet some Polish girls on a Friday or Saturday night, you went to Kopernik, later to Sirena. Good music, good food, and a very sort of Polish dancing atmosphere, right? And right inside of the Polish hall.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, the business is closed now because of the pandemic and because of Mr. Kubitryk's age. He decided it was the right time to leave. So the space is empty. So we have a few interested parties that would like to lease the space, but it's incumbent on us to be careful who we lease the space to. And because of the pandemic, we haven't had a formal board of directors meeting for some time, but there will be a discussion soon whether we should keep the space in our hands or lease it out to another party. So the comment, one of the comments that are made is, well, the space served a purpose for Polonia, and it did, but times are changing. We used to do a lot of dances at the Polish Hall that we don't do anymore.
That's right.
So time marches on. From my perspective, I would like to see that as a fourth banquet room because of the size that it is. It lends itself well to what we have, you see. Having said that, I've had several discussions with our head cook, Pani Danusia, that we should continue with the Sunday brunch tradition, simply because there's urodziny, imieniny, chrzciny, and tak dalej. So those things that we should do. Some of the other things that Mr. Kubitryk did, I'm not sure that I'm personally in favor, but I'm not the one that makes the decisions. It's the board of directors. So, as time goes on, things change. So it'll be in some format. The room needs renovations in a major way, so that's another animal that we have to tackle.
Well, I like your vision, but not for me to decide. But I certainly see the merit of what you're saying. Stan, anything else that we glanced over that you would like to highlight, share with us?
Oh, I think that's pretty well it. I've watched with keen interest on the acreage next door, and there's a handful of people that are quite involved now. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But perhaps I should say that when Andy Kubicki's father passed away, and I was at the funeral, and then I went to the lunch stipa after, and Father Karchas was there, and he saw me, and so he brought me up to the office to Plebania, and he showed me drawings for Polonia Center that was going to be built there, and that was a major disappointment of mine, because here we've had the Polish Hall. Here we could have had a building, and that doctors, dentists, hairdressers, those kind of delicatessens, what have you, could have been there, and people gravitating to these businesses. The church wanted to build there. Why? Because they had to do major renovations. They had problems with the roof. Parking was limited. Cease of daycare, the nuns wanted to build an expanded daycare center, and to me it made so much sense, and for one reason or another it didn't happen, and so we still have the land that's valuable. There are some people working on doing something with it. I hope in my time here that I see something that will happen there. But there are people involved, and this goes back to your question a few minutes ago, where do I see Polonia going? So, there are things that are happening.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be interesting to see when the dust falls down how it all shapes up. Thank you, Thomas.
Great. Stan, thank you. On behalf of the Canadian Polish Historical Society, thank you for sharing your story. Very, very interesting narrative. We're fortunate in Edmonton. We have a number of prominent Polish families that really have been involved throughout the entire life in the life of Polonia, and definitely you're one of them. So thank you for sharing.
My pleasure and honor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dzień dobry Panom i również dziękuję za przybycie na to dzisiejsze interview. Więc mam dzisiaj takie specjalne podziękowanie. Przy tej okazji proszę przyjąć kilka słów podziękowania do Pana właśnie Stanisława Wilka. Dziękuję za te 16 lat wspólnie spędzone, za poświęcony czas, za zaangażowanie, za wytrwałość, za życzliwość i dziękuję serdecznie za zaufanie. Zaangażowanie się i pomoc drugiej organizacji wymaga szczególnego wysiłku i zrozumienia. Więc dziś, przy tej okazji, z naszych serc, wszystkich, całego zarządu i członków Kanadyjsko-Polskiego Towarzystwa Historycznego serdecznie Panu dziękujemy za wszystko. Przez 16 lat spędzonych były różne chwile. Nieraz nie było miejsca w Domu Polskim, były różne zajęcia, ale zawsze znalazło się miejsce i czas. I zawsze Pan Stanisław naprawdę był serdeczny i nam użyczył. Nigdy nie spotkaliśmy się ze słowem nie możecie, czy nie macie miejsca. Więc dziś jest okazja, serdecznie dziękujemy.
Dziękuję.